Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I'm going to call our work session meeting to order, and it's for the purpose of a presentation and update by the director, by, oopsie, just when I was getting ready to say some names, Richard Clinch and the Jacob France Institute from the University of Baltimore, the University of Baltimore, on the town's economic development strategic plan in partnership with the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission. So we have some heavy hitters with us tonight, and we do thank you so much for being here and presenting us with the plan and assisting us. Yep. Okay, I'm trying to make my screen larger so I can see everyone. I was trying to read the names. Richard Clinch, I see you, and Miss Agnes Artemel.
Correct.
Yes. And I also see, I just see Sam. Sam, what is your last name?
Oh, Sam White. I should have put my last name.
Oh, okay, Sam White.
Yeah,
well,
Sam
I know
White.
you already felt like you were with family, so you just.
And you know what? Exactly. I'm gonna do a little spiel before we actually get started, but yes.
And so we just have our council members with us, and that's Miss Betsy McCulley, Miss Hillary Chester, and Miss Sarah Turberville, as well as Mr. Johnson. You can't see him because he is on the telephone. And there's Mr. Zachary Luckin. Ooh,
evening. Thank you.
Last names, I'm loving them. And then we also have, of course, our town administrator, Mr. Barnes, as well as Miss Avery, who is our town clerk, and our videographer, her husband. Okay. So, Mr. White?
Yes.
No. Yes? Oh.
Yes.
Sam.
You got me, Miss White.
Yield the floor to you.
Sam, for sure. Good evening, everyone. Mayor Grant and members of the town council. Again, my name is Samuel White. I'm the project manager for the town of Edmonston Economic Development Strategy. I just want to bring you up to date a little bit. On May 13th, 2021, the town of Edmonston, through the Prince George's County Planning Department, Planning Assistance to Municipalities and Communities Plan was approved for the Economic Development Strategy. The purpose of this economic development strategy is to foster a more resilient economy and develop a vision that the public, private, institutional stakeholders can organize around and act upon to drive investment. On June 24th, 2021, the consultant team of Jacob Francis Institute, University of Baltimore, and Artemel and Associates, and I'm glad I said that right, Inc., received the notice to proceed and with the effective date of July 1st, 2021. Tonight, the consultant team will present research and analysis findings from the last few months in preparation of our next step, which is the Community Visiting Consensus Building Workshop. Next, I will turn it over to Richard Glitch. Richard, it's on you to begin the presentation. Thank you very much.
I was going to begin with a very brief overview of who we are. So I'm Richard Clinch. I'm the director of the Jacob France Institute. The JFI, Jacob France Institute, is the sponsored research unit of the Merrick School of Business at University of Baltimore. We've been around about 30 years, and we really focus on economic and workforce development planning and neighborhood analytics here in Maryland, and I have a national practice as well. Now, I'm the co-author of the soon-to-be-released Prince George's County Strategy, and I'm really kind of the lead on the data portion of this. And then there's Artemel and Associates, Agnes, who's you introduced herself earlier, which is a consultancy specializing in community outreach and economic development for real estate and economic development. Zach, if you could just hit the next slide, just kind of giving you an overview of who we are. And Zach and Sam, I think we can say that people can interrupt at any time and ask questions, correct? So go ahead at any point in the process. It's a small group here. I do better off the cuff than I do talking from slides. So feel free to ask a question at any point here. So the goals for today for this work session, which is really the end of the second task, is to give you an overview of the project, because when we came and did our site visit, we only talked to the mayor and a couple council people, but not everybody. Then to present the research and analysis findings, which is task 2, in terms of the economic and demographic data analysis, which I was the lead on. And then the real estate data and analysis with Agnes was the lead on. And then kind of talk about the next steps. So Zach, if you could hit the next slide. So task 1 was the kickoff meeting and refinement of the work plan. We did that on August 19th. We did a town walking tour all the way back in August, which was a great time to do it, except it was very hot and we couldn't get the ice cream from Berliner, which they had graciously offered us. Task 2, which we'll present the findings of today, is the research and analysis portion. The next task is the workshop for community visioning, which Zach and Agnes will talk about. Then task 4 is a second work session, kind of giving you the results of that. Task 5 is a community workshop where we'll present kind of some draft ideas on economic development strategy for the town. And then the final task will be coalescing all of that into a final economic development strategy. So that's kind of an overview of the project. And this is our project timeline. And as you can see, we're having the work session in December just because things got ahead with COVID and some of the other things. But this is the task. And I think, Zach, we've shared the slides, right, with the group?
I can send them out right after this to everybody.
Okay.
I'll send them to Rod and you can share them with the group.
So you'll have all this. This is just this is part of the proposal. This is our work plan going forward. And it won't affect the end date, that we're a couple weeks late, 1 week late. But so this is the outline and kind of timeline for the whole project. So unless there's any questions about what we're doing, I will jump in, if you could hit to the next slide, into the data. So does anybody have any questions now about what we're doing and why we're doing it?
Nope.
Okay, hearing none, I'm just going to go into the results. So what we really did was really look at the town's population, economic base, real estate base, and came up with kind of the standard things we look at when we prepare economic development strategies. So again, this is something I've done for the county, other cities, nation, or other states, Maryland as well. So in terms of your population, on table 1, which is on the right-hand side, you'll see that the town of Edmonston has had a really slight decline, 9 persons in population, slight decline 23 in terms of households, but the town is lagging some of the peers. So we selected these peers and ran them by you guys earlier in the process. So we compared you to Bladensburg, Hyattsville, Riverdale Park, so kind of the neighboring municipalities. So you're lagging them in terms of growth, but I think one of the issues here is that you're really very built out. So there wasn't a lot of developable space here. So this isn't necessarily an indicator of distress in any way. It's a statement that you really don't have a lot. You've really been fully developed for a while in terms of your residential base. If we could hit the next slide. So what we then did was use census. Sam just sent a note to put your questions in chat, which will work as well. We looked using Census Bureau of ACS data, American Community Surveys. This is what replaced the long form in the census, which is how you get data on smaller areas and intervening census years. And here we compared you to the United States, Maryland, the county, and the 3-peer municipalities. But basically, your town is younger, you're gaining a younger population, and you have a higher concentration of Hispanic residents. You're about 55% Hispanic, which was higher than almost anybody else except Riverdale Park, which was the same. Your median age is about 31.4 years old, which is relatively low compared to the county. So you're younger than the county, younger than many of your peer, and more Hispanic than many of your peer jurisdictions. If you could hit the next slide, Zach. So kind of switching from broad demographic or population trends, we then looked at your job creation, and what we used here was what's called the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Program from the census. Has data various sources. I can go into them if you're really a glutton for economic punishment. I can describe what they are, but basically this is the only source of sub-county data on the types of jobs, the types of employers you have. So table 5 here, what you see is that the town is lagging in terms of job growth. So in the last year, it ended up being 6 years. We looked at, that should say 2019. I fixed that. I apologize. I fixed the date. So we missed that in going through the edits. But you're lagging in terms of employment growth, and you're losing professional services and retail jobs, but kind of doing well in terms of manufacturing and some of the other sectors. So you have a really heavy base of employment, looking at your industrial parks in manufacturing and professional services areas as well. So or residential services industries. So if we could hit the next slide.
We've got a raised hand here, Richard, if somebody has a question.
There we go. Sarah, could you please, I apologize for missing it. Could you ask me your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could describe what all is encompassed by manufacturing.
Sure. This is
In
all
Edmonston.
driven by what are called NAICS codes. So this is traditional manufacturing, which would be anything from, say, food preparation. Trying to think of the county employers. You have an ice company, so believe it or not, ice is manufacturing. So it's things that make, so it's really how the industries are classified based on, national, what's called the National North American Industrial Classification System. So, some of the manufacturing, it would not include your automotive companies. That would be in really kind of spread out over a couple things, but should technically be really kind of in other services, but some of them might actually show up in manufacturing. We can't look at the detailed data for this. Did that come close to answering your question?
Yeah, because I definitely was curious about where a lot of these auto repair shops, where they fit into this. Because if it's
We can't look at the raw data, we don't know. But what I would say is some are showing up in manufacturing, but it would really kind of more be in some would, believe it or not, be classified possibly in retail, misclassified, because that happens a lot, but mostly in other services. So some of them are definitely showing up in your manufacturing, kind of looking at this employment numbers. But they shouldn't be, but that's probably where they are showing up when you look at these actual numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Richard, you got 2 questions in the chat from Hillary. Are the employment data and trends from the residents or from our businesses?
These are employment I should have said that earlier. There's 2 ways of looking at employment, as you know. So these are based on these are for the employer. So these are economic development really focuses in on the business base. So that's what's in here. And we have a couple slides later on about your residents. And what was the other question?
She has another question. Do you have a sense of percentage of people who live in Edmonston also work in Edmonston?
We have a slide on that. It's relatively low.
Okay. Thank you.
If we could hit the next slide. So, so here we're kind of discussing what the composition of your business base is. So the town of Edmonston has a high level of employment per resident. That's the chart on the top right-hand side. So you have, as you know, a large base of a large amount of employment space, kind of an industrial park, and then on the south of the town. So you have a really high level of jobs per resident. So you have this is very high compared to most other municipalities in the county. You have a specialization in manufacturing, which again, I think is picking up some of your auto, but also transportation, distribution, and logistics. So manufacturing is 17%, distribution logistics is 8%, but you have limited office. As you know, you have a relatively low level of kind of office buildings in those parks. I mean, there are office uses in some of those employers, but you have a relatively low office space compared to, say, the county, where office is much more highly specialized. Then the bottom right-hand side here is you compared to the county and your peer municipalities by some of the key sectors we called out here. So you can see when you look at the first chart, or the first set of bars on the left-hand side, you have a relatively small retail base compared to some of your competing jurisdictions. You're at about 18%. You have a very high share of manufacturing, which we've talked about. You have a good base of transportation, distribution, and logistics, because that's important, because that's a key target for the county in its soon-to-be released strategy, but a really low base in terms of just about 3% of your jobs are in traditional office uses. So if we could hit the next slide.
Can I ask a question again? Sorry, this is Hillary. So on that last slide, where it's the employment per resident, again, is this how our residents are employed and where they work?
This is simply a way of looking at, oh, sorry, did I interrupt?
Kind of.
This is simply the number of jobs in the town divided by the number of residents in the town. So what you can see here is that, there's places like, say Bladensburg, where you have a relatively low employment base, but a high residential base. So you have a lot of employment space relative to the size of your town. This is simply a way of just simply saying that. So the next town kind of looks at the composition of these jobs. So the LEHD data has information on kind of the education of the workers in those jobs. So again, these are the workers in the jobs in the town, not the residential base of the town. Really here, what you could say is that you have a relatively higher concentration of lower skill levels, but also a higher concentration of better paying jobs. So when you look at something like automotive, what you'll see is that it has a relatively low skills level. You don't need a PhD to work in an auto shop, but auto shops would tend to pay higher than, say, many other competing lower skilled jobs. So 44% of the persons employed in the town, so these are the job holders working at jobs in the town, have completed high school or less, which is the highest among the peers, so relatively low skilled employment base. But only 10%, which is the lowest, earn the lowest level of income, again, using the LEHD data here. And you have a higher share, given the diversity of Prince George's County, of white alone. 67% of the people working in the county are white alone, and Hispanic, 30% versus 11% in the county. So the bullets kind of give you the points. The data is on the slides to the right. So again, looking at your employment base. And again, I don't see if people have their hands up because I'm looking at the slides. So please, Sam, tell me if I'm missing anybody.
Right now, nobody's hands up, so you're okay. Continue.
Excellent, thank you. So the next slide. So, you really, despite not having an economic development department, which I think it's 7 or 8 of the municipalities in the county have economic development offices. You have great data on your economy. So you provided us with the database of your town employers. So 124 businesses are listed as being in the town. Was there a question? I heard something, okay. The LEHD says you have about 1,486, so about 20% of these are, and you have 20% of the zip code level jobs. And you have 7 of the, what I did was look at Hoover's, which is a database of employers. And you have 78 zip code, which is the much bigger zip code area that serves the whole area. You have 7 of the 78 zip code or employers in that zip code with 40 or more employers. Some of your key employers here are Crick Plumbing, Wagner Company, Vatica Contracting, the Doyle Printing, and printing will also be classified as manufacturing. So, so you have, again, a very strong business base here to work from in your economic development strategy. So if we could hit the next slide. So again, now we're transitioning to, so we looked at your population, relatively slow growth. We looked at your employment base, which is stable, relatively low skilled, but relatively highly paid, or better paid than others. So then we're now looking at the composition of your residential workforce. So here we're talking about the people who reside in the town. So you have a slightly lower income than the county and most peers. You have a slightly higher poverty rate, but it's lower than many of your peers. However, you do have more middle income residents. So again, the data for this is all on the right-hand side here. And I think the more middle income residents has to do with, most of the housing in your town is, owner occupied. So you have a relatively higher incomes because people can afford to have their house. Whereas in, peer jurisdictions, I think there's a lot more rental property, and that would tend to attract lower, income residents, not low income residents, but people with lower income than homeowners. So if we could hit the next slide. So, in terms of the key findings, the chart on the top right is the educational attainment of your resident workforce. The one on the bottom right is the occupation of those resident workers. So again, these are people who are employed. And the left-hand side chart there is the labor force participation rate. So labor force participation measures how many people are in work, working, or looking for work, or unemployed. So you have a relatively high, among the highest levels of workforce participation, which is good for economic development. You have a relatively less educated population, and you have a higher concentration of residents employed in trades and sales and office occupations. So these are good, solid middle skill types of occupations. So this is your core resident workforce analysis. Kind of any questions about the last bit of data? Then I'm going to go into the town budget. Figured I'd break it up here before I talk about budgets. Oh, Sarah, you've got another question?
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of interested in what the implications are for what you found, but I can hold that if that's going to be a topic later down the road. It will be a topic
when we get towards the end of the presentation.
Okay.
So if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So if we could just hit the next slide. And then, as you know, you're a relatively small municipality compared to many of your peers, which is reflected in your budget. So I just looked at everybody's budgets. So compared to your peers, your town budget was $1.4 million, which is relatively low, but you have a relatively high, unfortunately, I can't find data on the composition of the property tax base, but you can get data on personal property taxes, which you get a lot of. So presumably with the high level of jobs per resident you have, and kind of measured by business personal property taxes, I think a strong amount of your business, of your town tax base is generated by your substantial employment space, which is good because though employers tend to demand less town services on average than residences, but as we've talked about both in the tour and earlier today, kind of especially with your large number of auto-related uses, they do tend to create some of these other issues related to parking and other types of issues. So again, stable population, stable job base, high manufacturing, high concentration of employment. That's kind of the key takeaways here for the analysis of demographic. I'm going to pass it over to Agnes, who's going to talk about the real estate data. So I think unless there's any other questions, if we could advance the slide and go over to.
Okay, thank you, Richard. We're going to go over some real estate data, both on housing and on commercial space. And then later on, I'll talk a little bit about infrastructure, which is relevant to economic development planning. So we looked at housing first, and there are different data sources, but this is one that Richard's team prepared, and it compares, again, Edmonston to Bladensburg, Hyattsville, and Riverdale Park, which is our other communities that we're comparing to. And we found that Edmonston's housing by and large is older than in the other communities, has lower vacancy rates. You have a lot of single family housing compared to other places. It's all very stable, tends to be owner occupied. And I think because of the Hispanic population also has higher household sizes than many other places. So if we can move to the next slide. This is about the commercial space. And this is from a source called CoStar. CoStar is a huge database that's available for all of the jurisdictions in the Washington area and beyond. It's excellent in terms of counting up office space. It's not as good on retail and industrial. So we also looked at other sources. But right now, looking at just the CoStar data, you'll see you have about 861,000 square feet of industrial space. Very low vacancy rate. They have 54,000. When I tried to count up 2021, I came up with even less than that. So the industrial space is almost fully occupied, very popular, leases quickly. There is little retail space, as you all know, and it tends to be on the fringes of the town. Also very limited office space, and both of those are shown in the employment data that were discussed earlier. You don't have much employment in those categories. So industrial is really the main driver of the economy right now. And the lease rates in all types, well, the lease rates in retail and industrial are comparable to others in the metro area. The office leasing rate is a little bit low, but again, there's so little there, it's really hard to tell because there's not enough to count to get a valid sample there. So let's go to the next slide. Then we went and did a kind of a manual inventory of space. And of course, when you're dealing with a town the size of Edmonston, it's wonderful because you can actually count everything. So we have these enormous spreadsheets that actually list every property, both the residential and the industrial. Of course, as you know from looking at the map and knowing your town, you really have two large industrial areas, one to the north and one to the south, and they dominate the commercial market. Almost all of the industrial space was built in the 1960s and 70s. It's fully leased for the most part. The square footage we came up with from the Maryland State Assessment Database is close to what CoStar had, a little bit less. The very few sales of industrial property, I think everybody's hanging on to it because it's good. It's good to have. There were 3 sales in the north in the last 3 years. And one sale in the south. In terms of leasing, the prices are comparable north and south, although the north seems to be tidier and better organized. I'm showing some vacancy, but for example, the vacancy in the south was when Berliner had some earlier this year, but since then they've filled up. So there's really very little available to any new occupants. And if space does become available, it fills up quickly. I also want to note that we spoke to several of the business owners, including Mr. Martin at the Northern Industrial Park, and confirmed all this information that industrial space is a very solid driver of the economy and is functioning well. Next slide. We also took a look at the real estate inventory, and again, as we said earlier, the housing stock is relatively old. Most of it was built, like almost 64% was built before 1946, which is just amazing. And only 2.8% has been built since 2000. That relates to the lack of new land available for housing construction. Most of the houses are on fairly small lots. And most of the houses are also themselves fairly small. Either, you have 45% between 1,000 and 1,500 square feet and 27% under 1,000 square feet. So they tend to be small houses, but they're popular. We find very little vacancy in the housing. I think prices have been going up slightly. They turn over fairly quickly when they are for sale, as you'll see on the next slide. So, next slide. I looked at 32 listings that closed since March of 2019. Again, the same thing. Housing was relatively old, relatively small. The average closing price now was $343,000, and that seems pretty good. And the average days on market is 35, which is comparable to other places. Next slide. Now we turn to infrastructure and try to see Edmonston's place in a physical standpoint. So looking at transportation, we mapped Edmonston over the metro lines. There's the two metro lines, a future purple line, and a bunch of bus lines on this drawing. And you'll see that Edmonston is surrounded by transit, but only has really one line going through it. It has, we inventoried 3 parks plus a town park. The public utilities are the same as everybody else has. One thing that was noticeable is a lack of places where people can gather as a community. There's not really a town square or a town center or a school or the kinds of spaces where people do tend to gather and meet their neighbors. So that's one area that maybe would need to be filled in to provide a little more of a civic space or meeting space. Next slide. So looking at possible barriers in economic development terms, of course, you're all familiar with the railroad tracks, which forms a large part of the western boundary. This map shows the 2 industrial parks, north and south. Obviously, there's the Anacostia floodplain that goes right through the middle of town. The red is the retail, which is on the very edge of town. Main Street, Decatur Street, has been landscaped and is very attractive, but it's not a retail street, whereas most main streets tend to have a retail component. Another thing we were very interested in is that the town doesn't have its own zoning and land use control authority. That comes from the county. And there's recently been a zoning modernization, which is maybe changing the character or potentially changing the character of the Northern Industrial Park. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We also inventoried publicly owned land to see if there was anything that could be repurposed or turned into something different. And again, everything is pretty much committed. And then finally, again, in economic development terms, everything in Edmonston has a Hyattsville mailing address, which makes it really hard to develop a specific identity where people would say, yes, I'm going to start a business in Edmonston, or yes, I want to live in Edmonston. You really have to be from the area and know about the town to even know it exists, because otherwise it's a Hyattsville connotation. And there's nothing one can do about that. Obviously, it's the post office, but it's an interesting factor. Okay, next slide. So then we get into the analysis of strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and I'll let Richard take over from here.
Yeah, this really gets to the question of what it all means. So before we kind of jump in, do you have any questions about our kind of real estate and infrastructure assessment? We either did a good job or put you on sleep. So is it?
I was going to say that very good breakdown, very, very good breakdown. And I'm so glad that you noticed about the Hyattsville zip code. That's a huge issue, but what can we do? Like you said, about the post office. Thank you. That was great.
So I do want to say on the question of identity, though, beyond the zip code, of all the people we talked to, really spoke, with warm hearts about Edmonston. They were very happy to have businesses in the town, and they noted the cooperation from the town hall and the council. So you do have an identity in spite of that whole zip code problem. People who are in the town are really happy to be in the town.
Agreed. I agree. Yeah.
And so
That's
we
good to
haven't
hear.
done the community outreach, which is the next kind of part, but we talked to all of the major, the 3 people who own most of the property in town. And again, as Anya said, this is they all, what I'd say is you're very blessed with developers who have the town's interests at heart, certainly part of their plans, which is not necessarily common in many of the other places we've worked. So that's really very strong. So Martin kind of talked about how he kind of constrains some of the uses in his parcel because he knows that you have to go through town to get there, and that's a very positive way for him to look at it. So, I mean, one way to kind of look at things is what's called a SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis kind of looks at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So a strength is something that you have, that makes your town competitive. A weakness is something that hurts your economic development prospects. Opportunities are what you can really capitalize on, and threats are the things that can really hurt your development of strategic economic development goals and strategies. And then, because I'm an economist, I like to make things overly complex. We kind of put our, what we call the SWOTs on the outside of this, and kind of some preliminary ideas. These are just ideas we're kind of throwing out there today that we're going to be developing much more fully as we talk to you and talk to the residents of the town in the next part. So in terms of strengths, you're fiscally sound. Nobody complained about the taxes. In fact, many of the larger employers said that they have no problem, and they see the town's police as a selling point. You have a very strong commercial and industrial property base. As I said, that tends to bring in more revenue than it costs in terms of the provision of town services. You're a designated, so the little sub bullets there are just the ways we measured that. So you have large number of jobs per residents, middle skill, higher paid jobs, many larger employers, you have community draws, and you're a sustainable community. In terms of weaknesses, in terms of what a town can do to promote economic development, your lack of retail space. Many towns really focus in on developing their retail space. You have a real lack of retail space in the town. Your main street isn't really retail. There's one restaurant on it. You have a lack of office space, and that's really what's driving the overall county and regional economy. You have, as the map we showed earlier showed, there's limited mass transit options right in the town. You're ringed by it, you're close to it, but you're not directly served by it. Another issue is in terms you have a small town budget, which, as I said, several municipalities in the county have economic development departments. It would be hard pressed to have one in your town given the small budget. And as Agnes talked about, and this is common in all municipalities in the county, you do not control your own land use and zoning regulations. That's controlled at the county level. So in terms of opportunities, you have real opportunities to revitalize some of your older industrial properties. You can diversify your industrial space. That's a real opportunity here into different uses. Your location is a significant asset. Hyattsville is your zip code, but it's also one of the communities in the county that have a strong vibe and is very geographically well known within the region, is doing well. And the new zoning will permit different types of uses here. Now the threats, so again, things that can kind of limit your economic development options going forward is you're physically, geographically separated by floodplains, railroad tracks, and other things from the vibrant communities surrounding you. You have limited population growth. Again, that's not a bad thing because you don't have property to develop, but you don't have a growing population. You're lagging on employment growth because your area is very full, but it hasn't been generating a lot of jobs and a lot of job growth. But one of the things we've really talked about when we talk to some of the developers is that what happens is people come into the town, into the industrial space, and they start their business and they grow, and then they hit a certain point and move out because they can't find any more space in the town. And so and a lot of those properties, as they've talked about, have turned over recently. So that, that can change with the performance of the current tenant class. And then as we've talked about, kind of the appearance, especially kind of in the South industrial part, is the appearance of some of your industrial tenants, kind of the reliance on auto repair here is kind of a threat. It's hard, several of the property owners have kind of talked about this issue of parking being a key issue in the town. And we've heard it, from you all when we did the site visit. So then kind of these preliminary ideas are hopefully kind of leaned up to the strengths and weaknesses clearly in here. So again, some preliminary ideas are, what are the opportunities to upgrade the commercial industrial areas is one of the things we're talking about is the idea of an industrial business improvement district. And there are a couple of them around the nation, kind of, the BIDS business improvement districts are something the county is pushing right now, where you kind of have a user fee or increase in tax that goes to fund the improvements of the industrial properties or retail properties. There's a real opportunity here to diversify your tenant mix. One of the things you mentioned in your sustainability plan and in the site visits is green industries. This is similarly targeted by the county. So you're very consistent with the county's goals here, kind of expand on your eco-friendly initiatives. And one of the things that did come up is this, the whole port towns designation is one that has some real play behind it. In terms of addressing some of your weaknesses, some of the ideas we kind of had here that build on your opportunities are examining redevelopment along Kenilworth Avenue. What are the linkages to the Purple Line? The Purple Line, as you all know, will completely reshape this part of the county and have substantial impacts, and you're really not that far from it. And then some ideas I have are what are some ideas for shared economic development resources, maybe among some of the municipalities that are neighboring that don't have economic development departments. These are just some preliminary ideas. These are not the strategy. These are just ideas we're kind of throwing out there right now. And so again, in terms of addressing the threats, was there a question? I heard a comment or maybe a cough. Again, linked to some things is, upgrading the commercial areas, examine ways to address these barriers to the neighboring communities, providing incentives for housing rehab and upgrades, which could create some more population growth or diversify your population. Create opportunities for multifamily and mixed use zones that may or may not be of interest to you. And then one of the things the county is targeting and the state is targeting in places like Baltimore City and DC are doing very well, and you do have the industrial space for it, is creating opportunities or incentives for maker spaces. So these are spaces where you have shared industrial uses among smaller companies that will hopefully then grow in place. So that's kind of our preliminary ideas. Do you think we're on track? Do we want to open it here, or do we want to go to the next steps and then open it up?
I think we can open it up since we got this slide open, and then we'll take questions at the end as well.
Kind of any comments on this slide?
Well, it's kind of a lot to take in all at once.
Richard and Agnes and the team, great job. These are all wonderful topics that our elected officials have talked about over the last year and even longer in some cases as the Purple Line came to be. Has there been any thought or any look at annexation to the east, where it is incorporated property and some vacant property? And in our old Port Town sector plan, I think it was Agnes that you talked about a town center. I believe in that plan at the corner of Edmonston Road and Decatur, they had suggested that piece of property be acquired to develop into a town center kind of idea.
Looks like we should add that to the list. I didn't look at that in detail. That's a good point.
Matter of fact, I could answer that. It was a proposal or recommendation in the plan for that, to create that. That's something that the town of Bladensburg was considering to do. They haven't moved forward with anything with it yet, but it was a consideration based on the 2009 Port Town Plan was a recommendation for that. And a matter of fact, they was looking at the, which is approved zoning now, they was looking at proposed zoning in the area to make sure that they can get those uses there. So I wouldn't be surprised. That's something that may be revisited with the initiation of the Portstown plan that may happen in 2024.
Right.
So that might be something that may be revisited at that particular time.
And I know, Sam, you all are going to feed this report into that. So that's into that 2024. So that's really terrific. I appreciate that. About that. One of the things you talked about it, and you said it several times, Mayor Gant always says, as she reminded me today as I'm preparing for a presentation on Wednesday, I wanted to use a quote for her, and she says, "We're a small town but mighty." And so one of the things I wondered about is resources. As you put there, we do have a small budget, and in terms of redeveloping Kenilworth Avenue or creating more retail on Decatur Street or doing some of these things, will this plan help identify some of those partners and some of those resources and folks that we can go to help get some assistance maybe to do that?
So yes, we'll come up with some broad ideas. So I think, and try to tie it into some of the county initiatives that exist either through the planning or through economic development. I mean, one of the strengths you do have is that the inner Beltway communities are really what this current administration is targeting for economic development. You don't have some of the issues that some of the other neighborhoods have in terms of blighted retail, which is one of the real focuses of the county. But maintaining industrial space has got to be, and is hopefully going to be a core part of the county strategy going forward. So helping you there. So yes, that would be some of our ideas. So working with you and the planning department to come up with those ideas, working with the county economic development department.
And I see Sarah has her hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering about the sort of the order of these things. It's funny, your preliminary ideas definitely reflect some of the things that we've talked about. So this is an incredibly validating experience to have experts come in and tell us that we were headed in the right direction. But like the issue of having a barrier to communities near us because of, say, the railroad tracks, but then also wanting to look at some redevelopment opportunities like on Kenilworth Avenue or some other places within town, but it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. So do you have any recommendations on sort of like, what do you think is the most important pieces of this to pursue first?
I think that's why we're talking to you to kind of come up with what you think are the priorities there. I mean, the physical barriers are going to be very hard to address. You can't move railroad tracks. You can't move a floodplain. Bridging them but kind of the connections to the north kind of came up, which is into Riverdale Park, and the barriers there came up in the interviews, and those would be low-hanging fruit. So no, the issue is we would try to work with you to come up with ideas and then help you prioritize them.
But it does seem to me that a lot of the opportunities lie in the Northern Industrial Park, but you have to make some decisions as to whether it's better to retain that as industrial or to allow it to go to mixed use, which is what the new county zoning is going to be. And then if mixed use is a desired path, then there needs to be better roadway connections to Riverdale Park and to the MARC train in that town center. So there's a whole policy decision that would have to be made, which would be part of these community visioning workshops to see what really makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if we've really talked about that, Mayor, but looking at like kind of recentering the or creating a like economic development zone that maybe has new residential opportunities available to it in that northern part, and then have that connected to Riverdale. Like, even though it's like the northern tip of the town, you know, I think we all sort of would rather something be more centrally located, but just the way that Edmonston is geographically laid out, and with the barriers that we have, that may not be possible, but we could potentially have like a town center that exists up there. Okay, thank you all.
Mhm. I totally agree with that. I see it, that's for sure. You know, Decatur, you mentioned Decatur Street and the lack of, in which you are totally on point with your, and I love the SWOT. That breakdown was really good. And I believe you're totally on point with what we've discussed as a council. A few questions on Decatur, the lack of retail. I'd really like to know the potential of retail, our retail on Decatur. I know we have a couple of businesses that, well, we have that, the school, the old school, that's a warehouse business. We do have La Fondita, which is really retail, customers coming in and out. How does that look on a street in Edmonston, our main street in Edmonston, that's not so long, where we have houses there? What does that potential look like? I think that's been our setback, holdback. You know, we see a few homes that are that have been abandoned for a while. We understand that maybe someone bought it, maybe someone didn't, but they've been sitting for so long. And I know we've talked about Mr. Barnes and I, and maybe a few other council members, what can we do as far as retail? You know, I want a coffee shop, and I know where that house is and everything. I want a little coffee shop. But of course, we have parking that we have to think about. So really, what is our potential to have at least one more retail business on Decatur, our main street? Or are we really looking at like right at the corner? You know, maybe not on Decatur, but maybe on 49th or maybe on Taylor, maybe on Taylor, or maybe on 47th, you know, maybe at a corner, not necessarily on Decatur. What's that potential? And, you know, our budget is small. I don't know how to increase that budget. I guess it would have to be, we would have to gain some more residents. And I believe that our residents that are here, they stay. And we're attracting, like you say, a younger group of individuals. But also, we were talking about some type of designation that, let's say we opened up Decatur and we found we have the opportunity for four more businesses on Decatur. How do we, because we don't have zoning rights, how do we say this is the type of business that we'd like to have in our community? Because we need to find some type of zoning or some type of designation, environmentally better environment, so that we're not attracting the I don't want to point out auto body shops, but so many auto body shops where they're comfortable. So those are the things I just want to throw out. But you're right on target with what we are feeling, and as well as Mr. Barnes brought up about the annexation. But we want to get this part done so we can go ahead and annex, you know. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was a question or just my observation.
Well, knowing what your thought process is useful, because it also helps us prioritize what we look at. So we'll take another look at the Decatur Street situation, and maybe working with our county planners, figure out what the zoning will let us not do, if there are ways
like maybe
incentivize a retail business.
Right. Maybe some environmental kind of things that could go on. Maybe and I think Hillary, you and I talked about that, like emission. If you have an auto body shop, you can't do blah, blah, blah. this is what we recommend. Upgrade this, or, changing the oil on the side of, or, whatever we can do environmentally where the fumes aren't going into the air. Our residents aren't being affected by that. If we could put those type of designations on there, environmentally better community. That's my
those are all good thoughts, which we'll add to our list of things to consider.
Thank you.
I will
And
just
work with our county planners on.
Yeah, I'll jump in there just kind of from the planning department side. Some of these strategies we're looking at what we're calling the industrial business improvement district, where we can get, those tenants or those landowners to pay into a fund that can then improve some of those properties. I think that might be one of the more straightforward mechanisms for that. I know specifically on Decatur Street, the zoning is residential and then it's that industrial. And that has been continued with the new zoning. So that hasn't changed. So that's where I really think our biggest barrier. We're not really going to be looking at, just because the new zoning has just been passed, offering recommendations around changing the zoning. I think certainly the old school is a fantastic opportunity. But again, like a lot of, what Richard and Agnes have been saying, the vacancy rates are low, people, there's a high occupancy rate in a lot of these commercial spaces, or rather the industrial spaces. So turnover and kind of looking at opportunities to redevelop might be rather limited, again, with the exception of the new neighborhood activity center zone in the northern part of the industrial area there. So, I mean, it's kind of a tough situation. I mean, we're certainly going to look at that, but there's only so much we can do in those regards. But again, trying to build some better collaboration with the tenants in the industrial areas, try to get an understanding of maybe what are their needs if they're parking their cars in the street. If there's other issues about unsightly or noisy, smelly uses. If we can identify what they need, then we can kind of develop a more collaborative approach to cater to that, to improve it without trying to remove them. Again, we don't really have the ability to remove them. And then in terms of talking about, environmental requirements, that stuff usually comes through the code again. And since Edmonston doesn't have power over their zoning, there's really only so much we can do. Again, looking at incentives through site improvement, stuff like that, or when redevelopment opportunities do arise, making sure that there's a clear connection relationship with the landowner that we're aware of. And we'll lay this out in the strategy. We'll talk about potential funding sources, whether that's going out for grants. Your designated sustainable community. You've got Rod as a fantastic resource who's really on top of it from what I've seen compared to a lot of other places. So when it comes to applying for grants, initiating projects, I mean, that's a big advantage to you. So making sure that you're aware and able to leverage those resources when the time comes, I think is going to be some of our best opportunities to address some of the things that you just mentioned.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's mainly why I decided, let's go ahead and talk with the businesses. Let's connect. Let's find out what their needs are. Let's let them know where we're headed, what our desires are, so we can connect. And I think the first one was successful. What do you think, Mr. Barnes?
Absolutely. I think it was terrific to hear, the big issue that came up was parking. I did want to ask, I don't know who interviewed the businesses that you interviewed, but was there any consternation on their part for the zoning change in the North Industrial area to the mixed use, or were they happy about that particular zoning change?
So we did speak with Mr. Martin about that, who has probably 90% of the land area that's been rezoned.
Right.
And the big surprise to us was that he seemed unaware of it.
Oh, wow.
And then
there's another Mr. Martin that may be aware of it.
Maybe another Mr. Martin is,
Junior.
but this particular Mr. Martin was not.
Yeah, Junior may be more aware of it.
But he did go to great lengths to explain that they were a family business who'd had the land for a long time, and they really liked what they were doing, and they had handpicked their tenant mix, and they really enjoyed the business as it was. And this particular Mr. Martin didn't feel inclined to redevelop, and I found that fascinating.
Yeah, Mr. Junior was at the Mayor's Breakfast last Friday, and one of the questions he asked was he wanted to know what the residents were saying in terms of the type of businesses that they should be bringing in. You know, they bring in interesting ones as they always tell me or preach to me that they're bringing in soft service type businesses with, I think they recently replaced the rollerblade derby folks with a staging company, a company that does some kind of staging. And at one time they had the Smithsonian had space in one of their warehouses. They built a whole set for a movie or a theater production in one of the warehouses. So and you know, at one time they had a glass blowing. We were really proud of our glass blowing company because we did many events over there, and we did have, I think I told you this, on Lafayette Street, there was a building that we worked, Mayor Gant worked diligently. We got county council to make a zoning change or change the law so that they could operate a makers collective in that warehouse building. The issue when it came down to it in the end was not only the COVID hit, of course, but was parking. The parking issue just became a nightmare to try to solve. Now, the good news is the building sold to an environmentally friendly company called Rewild, R-E-W-I-L-D. They sell houseplants online and through distribution. So it's a great use for us to have in the community, but it certainly isn't the makers collective that the mayor had hoped to accomplish with the company we worked with for about a year and a half.
Well, COVID's turned a lot of things upside down. Hopefully we'll figure out where the world is going.
Yeah, that certainly is one of those things where it throws a monkey wrench in almost anything anyone's doing these days, looking at the future of office space when it's so uncertain of, you know, where trends will go in the workforce in the future, and trying to plan around that is, again, it's a sticky one. And we'll, you know, as the situation continues to evolve, I mean, obviously we would assume there's going to be a return to normalcy to some level, but, you know, understanding what that's going to be at this time is pretty hard to do.
Another question I had was, one of the seems like the problems we have is connecting with the Prince George's County economic development. We don't seem to be able to get an inroad there that gets much help. When I have businesses contact me, they're wanting to come to town, I connect them up with the person, then they never hear back from that person. The person doesn't follow up. We don't know what programs, we've had them come and talk to us in a presentation to the mayor and council, but it seems like after that, they forget we exist again and we can't get reaction. So I would hope maybe in this process, somewhere along the way, we identify who we should be working with there and how we go about building a relationship with those folks. Because like you said, we're not going to be able to hire a full-time economic development director. We're going to have to rely on those folks to do it. And we have some in the past. We work with them on redeveloping Three Brothers, which is actually in Bladensburg, but the parking lot is in Edmonston. And so we worked very long and hard with Mario to come up with a plan to add some either housing or retail, but it just never did come to be. But anyway, just that's maybe more of a comment than a question, like the mayor said. But we do seem to struggle with. We have such great relations with planning, with the planning, National Capital Park and planning, but we don't know how to get those relationships, I guess, going with economic development.
Well, maybe we could try to reach out to them. Because of COVID, it seems like everybody's hard to contact these days. It's been a challenge, but maybe we can reach out to them and maybe get them involved in this, and we can address that concern somehow, some way.
I know one of the business owners that was at the Breakfast Friday said he was doing an expansion. They're one of our larger employers, Wagner Roofing. I think they employ 76 people, and they reached out to him and got nowhere and was very frustrated. They did a huge expansion. They sold their one property and bought a new and invested million or more into that property. Same way with D&D Tire. They bought up a former manufacturing site, and they got no assistance or no for an expansion and growth opportunity that, and I tried over and over and over to connect them with an economic development person, and they just never did follow through. And John finally just gave up and didn't need them and moved forward. But that's been, we hear that now more than once. So we know that's a problem.
Okay, well, we'll try to reach out to them. Larry Hens, are you familiar with Larry Hens?
Yes, that's the name.
And yeah, I wonder if he's still there, and it's another person, I can't think of his name, that I know, but we'll reach out to them and have them.
We used to have a good connection because the Bladensburg finance officer's wife was our contact, but she moved on, and so then that, and then the mayor of Brentwood works at economic development with the Hispanic community, and she used to be our code officer. So we have tried a couple times to work through her. So we maybe just aren't going at it the right way, and just need a little direction from you professionals that can help get us on the right track.
Okay, we'll do our best.
I think one of the issues for the EDC is that, you have little vacancy, little space to develop, and their kind of core targets are inner beltway kind of retail reuse, and then elephant hunting for the bigger parcels, and smaller reuses are not a core target for them, but we can get an inventory of the different programs available either from them or from DHCD.
Richard, I don't know if you noticed or you saw, there's 4 lots over on 46th Avenue. They're 5300 46th Avenue, lot A, B, C, and D. They're vacant lots. They're right next to the railroad, of course, behind them, but right across the railroad is the Hyattsville apartments and all of the redevelopment that's occurred there. If we were interested in trying to get something cooking there, would we try to work through the economic development to find somebody that might want to speculate to buy that, to turn it into something that would benefit the town in some way? Or I'm
trying to remember the parcels from driving through. So this is in the northern section on the road that runs parallel to the road or next to the railroad tracks.
Yes. Yes.
I think you showed us these parcels, and it was in closer to town than it was to the north, right?
Yes.
Roughly, what's the acreage ballpark?
I don't know. We looked at one of the lots to put a parking lot, and it was going to take like 20 parking spaces maybe was going to fit on the lot.
Yeah, again, those are just hard the EDC just tends to be more focused on bigger parcels.
Bigger lot, yeah.
If you could assemble them or get an owner interested in doing something, maybe, but the issue is they don't get in the newspapers from a 5 or 2 acre.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the small deals are often more time consuming than the big deals.
The former elementary school sold in the last year or so, and I think it sold for about 1.5 million. A developer that owns the adjacent property bought that, and he left the tenant, a construction company, in the building. So I
think is the problem is that one of the things that's really coming out, and this is maybe good for the developers and the owners, but not necessarily great for the town strategy, is the industrial users are getting pushed out of DC. You have the land, and they can get tenants
right
without any effort. And redevelopment, especially in the county, can often be quite difficult. So you have to reach this point where the redevelopment potential becomes so obvious that the dollar signs make, overcome the barriers.
Yeah.
And you may be there in a couple of years. You're just not there, in my opinion, yet.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys. This is terrific. I appreciate it greatly. Just doing a terrific job.
I think we have a few more slides kind of on next steps. So if we could jump to the next one.
Yep. So we're going to be doing some, our community visioning workshop, which is really going to be our key opportunity to talk to, our residents and see what is it that they feel they want to happen. What do they want to see? What are these changes? And part of that, which is kind of something we touched on a little bit, but it's going to be a key, I believe, is really talking about what is the identity. I think Rod mentioned the mayor's quote there, talking about what is the identity of Edmonston? How do you know when you're there? What makes it, distinct? And then, identifying those values and opportunities and then leveraging those, both to make it more pleasant for existing residents, but also to attract new businesses. And just supporting economic development generally, improving those connections, whether that's to the river, that's, to the Purple Line. Do I have a question? No, okay. So sometime in probably early mid-February, we're going to be having the community visioning workshop. And, we'll certainly be talking more with you as we get into the finer grained details of that. Most likely it's going to be a virtual session. I know the planning department currently isn't slated to have any in-person events, and with the way things are going with COVID right now, I don't see that happening by then. So it's going to be a virtual community meeting. It'll be run by our consultant team and the planning department. And then following the meeting, we're actually going to have an online tool, kind of an interactive tool where there'll be some mapping and people can leave different statements and they can have some prolonged feedback for maybe 2 weeks after that meeting. Just, we know people aren't always able to make it, and we'll have a Spanish version posted as well. So again, try to elicit some good responses from our Hispanic and Latino population. But our goal here is to develop a vision statement, and it's got to be tailored to Edmonston. Maybe 3 or 4 kind of specific things that are, directly translate into actions and strategies that we'll outline later on. And we really want to stay away from these generalities. I've seen these a lot in vision statements for places. We want a diverse economy with a mix of uses. Well, that doesn't say anything about Edmonston. That could be anywhere. And what we want to really hone into is something around, we want to improve industrial areas and identify redevelopment opportunities for more sustainable uses. That's getting closer to that. So again, we're going to be doing our outreach during the process. We're going to, do another SWOT analysis. We're going to kind of show them our initial findings, community members and the businesses. And then we're going to ask them for what is their feedback. How do those align? How are they different? Do some goal setting around different elements of the economy in Edmonston, kind of talking about, again, what do people want to see? And then getting to that final vision statement, and there'll be some voting on this. It'll be kind of a combination of a guided discussion and an open discussion, really make sure that people are heard. And that most importantly, we come up with a statement or, a couple statements that people all agree on or pretty close to it, because again, getting this community buy-in, whether from a decision-making or funding standpoint is really key in this. And also grounding our stakeholders, our residents in reality, providing them these realistic goals and opportunity for Edmonston's future. Again, I think the old Port Towns plan said that there's going to be a quaint downtown with a mix of restaurants and small, and local retailers. Well, the zoning doesn't allow for that, or, we're at full occupancy in a lot of these places. So trying to bring it down to earth, let's talk about what is possible, and I think that'll help people kind of get a better idea of what a vision for Edmonston.
The data that Richard and Agnes shared tonight is just terrific. That's going to be really key to talking to the residents and folks about, so that they know what's possible, and based on what's here, and some of those things that are maybe the barriers. We are just to give you an update. I think I told you we're in the middle of a social media strategy plan also. We just had 80, they closed the surveys. We had 80 responses from the community, and they are now doing on December 15th, they're having their first listening session, and they've signed up 30 people for that. So, they're doing a combination of virtual and in person. So that might be a difference. But we used a little incentive. We gave them a $5 Dunkin' Donut card if they signed up, and they did it while we were doing our Christmas caravan with Santa in the back of the truck and the music playing and the council and the mayor handing out bags of goodies. So, but I think in this case, we're going to get a good response. We've got lots of people interested in, so I don't think we'll have a problem getting folks to participate in this. And the social media will be completed in terms of their outreach long before this starts. So that's a good thing.
Excellent. Yeah, that's going to be a fantastic opportunity. Again, the more voices in on this, the better. And we'll be doing a lot of promotion, in conjunction with you through social media, newsletters. Again, we'll have everything translated online, and we'll kind of take a stock of whatever other avenues you have through, big stakeholders in the community, whether some of the business owners to really get the word out about this, so everyone's being heard. And then following the community visioning workshop in February, perhaps in late February or into March, that's going to directly feed into what we're calling the consensus building workshop. And, from what I hear from Rod, the town council is pretty on board and, has a good relationship. So it's not much just consensus building as to taking the vision to the next step and really seeing, where in that can the town, insert some influence and play a key role in making some of these changes that we might want to see. So I'm going to hand it over to Agnes to talk about our consensus building workshop.
Right. So the consensus building workshop is sort of our last interactive step before we really start writing what the plan is, what the economic development plan is. So this is the opportunity for the town council to come together and indicate your priorities, because you'll have heard, you'll have the data set, you'll have the community's vision, you'll know what's possible, you'll know what your resources are, and you can start focusing in on, okay, these are the top 5 projects we could take on. These are our priority areas to clean up. These are our priority areas to diversify. I mean, whatever those priorities are the things that we're going to be working on in the consensus building workshop. And it's wonderful to hear that you all are pretty much of the same mindsets. Oh, please ignore my cat. He wants attention. So we're going to try to develop solutions that work for everyone, recognizing that there are diverse viewpoints in the community and perhaps on the town council. Try to focus in on a solution that works. So the basic process, and I'm afraid this diagram's a little bit small, but we start with an issue, or which might be a project or a priority, have a little conversation about it, and then once that starts, other voices chip in and have ideas or maybe suggest a way to modify it or to make it more viable. So there's a larger discussion, and then we're able to focus it in and get agreement, and that leads to a decision. And that's what that little diagram tells you. Next time I'll put it on its own slide. But our approach is to use a trained facilitator who knows how to elicit ideas from people, to find points of agreement and points of disagreement, and to get things focused in so that the priorities rise to the top, and that those projects and concepts and priorities that pretty much everybody can agree to or live with rise to the top. And then those are the ones that will be fleshed out in more detail in the final report. So that's the basic concept. And it would be the consultant team and the town council, a meeting very similar to tonight's.
And then following that, we'll start to draft the strategy for the town, and then there will be that final presentation at the end. But this is probably going to be the last big push in terms of working directly with the town. So this will be, really an opportunity to kind of get the gears turning now. I'm sure, Rod shared with us I think the strategic visioning or whatever your exercise that you had done recently. So we've already kind of got a handle on what some of your priorities are. Again, we've heard a lot of them tonight already. So really honing down what are the top 3 to 5. What do we want to prioritize? And again, which out of those are actually something that the town can play a major role in?
Right.
And I want to just add that I lied to you all earlier. I said I had a slide about the percentage of people that work in and out of the town. I didn't put it in because it was very low, but I looked up the numbers because I noticed it in the chat. I was going through to make sure we had all the questions. But of your group that's employed, roughly residents make up about 2% of the employment base in town. So of the employed residents, only about 2% work in the town. So it was really low. That's why I didn't make it its own slide. And again, that sounds low. It sounds like a bad number, but you're a very small municipality with an industrial base that draws regionally. So, bigger cities, Bowie's 4%, Hyattsville, I think Bowie's 5%, Hyattsville is about 4%. So it's not, that's not a number that you should be concerned about. You're a small catchment area. And those numbers I'm saying are from memory and they're probably wrong, but again, it's 2 or 3 times what you are, but there are 3 or 4 times bigger. So
yeah,
I have those numbers too, I just don't have them memorized. But again, I didn't put a slide in, I lied because it's in some of the other, I'm doing another town strategy that it's in because it's 5%, which is relatively high for the size of that town. So again, apologize for that. I wanted to correct it before we close down.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And again, we do have a last little Q&A. I know we've got kind of addressing things as they come in. So if anyone does have any remaining questions, please, let us know now. And then also, I'm just going to move to our contact slide here.
I do have a question, and this is an opinion. You twice, I think I've heard you mention port towns in the different presentations. What is your thought as far as our port towns in Edmonston? For me, I'm delighted to be part of port towns, and I think at one point we collaborated and did some great work. I believe that we were an example, we are an example to many other smaller municipalities in reference to collaboration. But as far as where we're located and where the other towns are located, do you know all of the towns that are within the port towns? You do? Okay, great.
I looked at the report. I don't do.
Fantastic.
So don't quiz me because I'll get it wrong. But
no, you won't. You clearly you're good at what you do. Go ahead.
Oh no, I actually don't remember. It's just I have the strategy. I've read it. I mean, to the extent the county is going to put resources in it, it can support. So I'll defer to the county on what that is. But I think collaboration with municipalities through that vehicle or other vehicle is a way to get stronger attention from the county's economic development department. So is port towns the right vehicle? I do not know yet. But the concept of collaborating with the other towns that don't have economic development offices is one that I really think has probably got some traction, at least to me. And so as we flesh that out, we want to see if it has traction to you and possibly to the county.
Okay.
Or I guess
I'm
more
interested
importantly,
in the port towns concept as a way of building identity or creating a brand, because port towns as a name has kind of an aura that sounds kind of cool. It's on the water and, these are former commercial ports. And I'm just interested in researching whether there might be an angle there that can help build the town's identity.
Yeah.
I think Sarah has she's raising her hand, Sarah.
Yeah, similar to the like trying to figure out whether or not port towns is the right way for us to pursue what's the word I'm looking for here? To combine forces. Another place that we've looked is creating like a eco district. And I don't know if this came up in any of your discussions with as part of this process. But by Community Forklift over there off Buchanan, Tanglewood, certainly like that's just auto body repair shop alley. But we did have some efforts. There was a Port Towns Community or Economic Development Corporation that we participated in for a while, but now is pretty much defunct. It had, had to actually give back a $600,000 grant that it had to develop that space by the levee that's sort of in front of Community Forklift. Because there's also a lot of weird things about who owns the land and the permissions that you have to get over there. But that space too, given that that's been sort of with Community Forklift and Tanglewood Arts, what was it called, Tracy? The like refurbishment, like furniture refurbishment place that was right there too.
Over by Forklift?
Yeah. At any rate, there were like a couple businesses there that really had that kind of flavor to them. And we were trying to think how we might be able to bring more of that into that particular corridor too.
Well, actually, that business moved to Hyattsville.
That's right. It did.
Fortunately, yeah. I forget the name, but they moved to Hyattsville.
Yeah, because they needed, I would imagine, more foot traffic, right? Like,
right.
So, so I just wanted to flag that for you all too.
Just a thought. I think the Port Town brand, that's an effort that started way back in 2009, I do believe, and it's a well-known brand. I know the town of Bladensburg is also doing a market feasibility and economic analysis study. And one of the suggestions was building on that brand because the brand is already out there. Port Town is well known. It's just building on it. And I think what has tapered off the individual towns trying to get their identity. And I think they can still use that Port Town brand and then build on that because it is a well-known brand really in that area. Everybody knows Port Town.
Woo, Sam, we needed you during the redistricting hearings. we needed you to say exactly that.
I think it's there.
The county council.
But it's just coming together and building on it because it already exists. You don't have to read it.
I think I told you, we applied as the Port Towns, Edmonston did the application, but we applied for a branding grant from the Department of Housing and Community Development for the Port Towns. They keep pushing the award date back. We got notice last week now that it was going to be this week, but now I think by the 4th of December, well, now that's come and gone, and so they must be pushing it again. But we certainly, if we get that grant, then we'll have some dollars to maybe take a look at how we can expand, Sam, that Port Towns label that you're talking about there.
Exactly. I think right now, because I think when you look at the municipalities in the area, everybody has that challenge. And the challenge is, how do we identify ourselves? Use Port Towns and build upon it because it's already there. Because when I think of that area, the first thing that comes to my mind is Portstown. And I know Edmonds is part of Portstown, Bladensburg, Cottage City, Calmar Manor. We all know that. We familiar where you are, but it's just that somewhere it's a little lost and you have to build on that. How to identify myself and still be associated with Portstown. Because I am a part of Portstown, but I'm Edmonston. I am a part of Portstown, but I'm Bladensburg. And I think this exercise is going to bring that out.
Right. Yeah, I've always felt kind of not lost, but kind of lost because we're on the other side. They're all connected there and then it's us. So I've always felt kind of lost, but connected. I know we played a major part because of our contribution. We've always been good about contributing, even though we're small, but we're mighty. But still, there was a little breakup, no breakup.
Exactly.
Yeah. But now we're broke up.
But this is the opportunity right now. You're starting early. So when that next master sector plan comes around, you already got that research already been done. So you got something to start with from the beginning. And all of them are doing that. And then you can actually take sustainable community renewal application, the action plan. You can use that. All of this is really helping out to where you want to go.
Right.
That's what we're trying to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Mr. Johnson, were you getting ready to say something?
No.
Okay.
No, just clear my throat.
Oh, okay.
So seeing that we don't have any other questions, unless anyone else has any final comments here, I just wanted to let everyone know that we're going to send out the PowerPoint, our contact information. We've got a little page on the planning department's website for the project with a lot of the information in terms of the schedule and goals that you've seen here. We'll continue to update that as we, hone in on dates for our meetings. And again, we'll be coordinating with you all on dates for that and making sure we find a time that works best for everybody. So again, we really encourage, please reach out to us. We want to make sure this is a collaborative project. Your input is key, as you know. And again, thank you for taking the time, being flexible to do this today. This is, a great first step in this. And we really look forward to, taking the next step after that and really having those conversations and getting to the heart of, what is a vision for Edmonston? And then what are these economic development strategies that are going to get us to where we need to go? So again, if there's any other questions or anything, please let us know. You can follow up with email with us afterwards.
No, we really thank you for your time, your efforts, and the connection that you have, with us. It's like you really know our thoughts. You've done your homework. You have, I guess, represented our thoughts, our vision, and you've stirred up some more creativity in us. So thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for your information. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. It's been a wonderful evening. And if there's any other council member that has any feedback, that'll be great. I yield the floor to you.
I tell you what, they've given us a lot of information. And I think this is probably the first time I've really haven't said a whole lot in a meeting.
You got that right.
I mean, I'm trying to take it all in. It's pretty overwhelming, the information you all gave us. And a lot of it is just right on point.
Yeah.
You might be getting a lot of questions down the road from me later after I review this again, but thank you guys. This has been awesome.
Yeah, really certainly. And during our visioning workshop, with the community, we'll be doing a review of these findings, but it'll be less data heavy, kind of, again, bring it down to earth and some terms that are a little more accessible to people. So I'm sure that'll kind of help in terms of, again, grounding this in reality and making it in something in relation to what everyone understands. So again, any feedback on any of this would be fantastic.
I'm sure you'll get it. I have some very smart and with it council members that definitely keep me and the staff on their toes. So I'm sure you may get some questions. So
well, you're motivated and you're passionate, and I admire it. Not everyone is. So that's a fantastic resource.
And let me just add one thing. All communication will come between me and Zach. Don't communicate directly with the consultant, because we always want to be in the loop. So if you have any question, anything for the consultant, make sure you send it through us.
Just be clear when you send that info.
Right.
Yeah. Just be clear when you send us that info.
Okay.
We're very military-ish. We believe in the chain of command. So we definitely go to Mr. Barnes. You saw him. You have to go through me first. I know that, Father.
And let me just add one little minor thing, but it's a very important thing. Zach wasn't feeling great today. Matter of fact, he was sick all day, and he managed to get through this. And I know he not feeling well. Let me just give him kudos for doing that. That's how dedicated he is to being here tonight. And I know he wasn't feeling well today. So Zach, kudos to you. Kudos to you.
Kudos.
And kudos to you.
We appreciate that. go get some rest,
Thank
please.
you. All right, so we'll be sending this out probably the next couple of days. We're going to make a couple small revisions. We'll give you the contact for Sam and I, and we'll give you the project website. And then again, we'll be in touch very soon to discuss our next couple of community meetings here.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
all.
And
Thank you,
thank you.
everyone.
It was a great
Take
conversation.
care. Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Everybody.
You know,
have
we
a good
feel
one.
you made us feel really important. I'm telling you. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
We don't take anything for granted.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good night.
Everybody have a good night.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Christmas.